Right. Right. So here, so next in this, the Romantic age, if you look at the poetic theory and practice, Wordsworth, that's I mean, we are moving on to the second block now, the Romantic period. So here we have William Wordsworth, okay, which is given to us. He tried to articulate the spirit of the new poetry in the preface to Lyrical Ballads, okay. Then poetry was seen as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The essence of poetry was the mind, emotions, and imagination of the poet, not the outer world. Now, in lyrical ballads, I mean, this is what, they by Wordsworth and Coleridge, both of them have actually written it, where then it started with the Romantic period. This was when the actual Romantic period had started. He declared that he was writing a new kind of poetry that he hoped would be well adapted to the interest of mankind permanently. In lyrical ballads, the subject matter would be different from that of earlier giants of poetry like Alexander Pope, who used poetry to satirize or to persuade the reader with argumentative techniques. For Wordsworth, good poetry was the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Such poetry would use simple, unadorned language to deal with commonplace subjects. Now, it's a mistake to think that romantics are as nature poets. Rather, these poets were mind poets who sought a deeper understanding of the bond between human beings and the world of the senses. Their search led them to a third, more mysterious element present in both the mind and the nature. Now, this element is a creative power that makes things happen. This power is the imagination. The romantics thought this superior to human reasoning. Each of the romantics had his or her own special view of the imagination. Now, please remember, this is one of the important aspect, imagination, which was quite prominent during this period of romantic era. However, all of them believed that the imagination could be stimulated by both nature and mind itself. These poets had a strong sense of nature's mysterious forces, which both inspired the poet and hint at the causes of great changes taking place in the world. Romantic poems usually present, please listen before going into the William Wordsworth, because we're going to talk about the Romantic period. So we're just looking into some of its features, right? Before directly going into the poet's biography, I'm just giving you some important points here. So romantic poems usually present imaginative experiences as very powerful or moving. And this suggests that the human imagination is also kind of desire, a motive that drives the man to discover things that it cannot learn by rational or logical thinking. Right. Some of the major romantic poets were William Wordsworth, William Blake, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, John Keats. So William Wordsworth and John Keats are two poets which we have it in our syllabus now. So William Wordsworth helped to launch the Romantic Age. His most famous work was the Prelude Chronicles, the spiritual life of the poet, has an interest and sympathy for the life and troubles of the common man. He is considered the nature poet by focusing ordinary people in country settings. Now, here the poem which is prescribed, and it is the Solitary Reaper. Okay, so it's a four 8-line stanzas of this poem. You have four stanzas of 8 line each are written in a tight iambic tetrameter. Okay. And tetra is 4, not penta is 5. So tetrameter. Each follows the rhyme scheme of AB, AB, CC, DD. So when you read the poem, as I told you, every stanza has 8 lines, and every stanza of the 8 lines of it have the end words rhyming in this pattern. AB, AB, CC, DD. And it goes on for all the four stanzas. Except for the first and the last stanzas, the A rhyme is off. Like, for example, field, self. If you read the poem, you will understand. Field and self. Then again, sang and work. Okay, that is only in the first and the last stanzas you have this kind of a difference. So this is a poem. Just look at the summary of this poem. It's a poem about music. The song, a Scottish girl sings as she cuts hay with a sickle. Now, this is Solitary Reaper. The meaning of the title, it means that somebody who is at the field, you know, and trying to, you know, cutting the hay with a sickle, and solitary, I mean, alone, lonely, right? Though the poem's narrator cannot understand what the girl is actually singing about. So the girl, as she's doing her work, she's singing a song, but it's not audible. So, he cannot understand. The narrator doesn't know what exactly the girl is singing. The girl's song sticks with him. Its melancholy beauty echoing in his head long after its sound has faded. In this way, the poem suggests the ability of art to transcend cultural boundaries and even language itself. So, the narrator did not understand what language it was, but he just understood the art of the poem, the music. Now, that is what happens, right? When you listen to some song, which is quite a popular song, it may not be of the language you understand, but still, because of its beat and because of its, kind of a rhythmic word and the lyrics, you will sometimes get attracted. I mean, you'll try to remember it. You even hum it, though you do not know the meaning of that word or a song. You still try to kind of remember it for some time, right? So the same thing happened with this narrator. As he was passing by, he saw a girl, a solitary reaper, who was, working in the fields, and she's trying humming, singing a song. And what is she singing about? He doesn't know. So that's what he's trying to prove, that the art to transcend cultural boundaries and even language itself. Art in the poem can communicate feeling or emotion even in the absence of concrete understanding. I mean, you may not understand it very clearly, but still you can figure out. Uh, I mean, the song communicates some kind of a feeling or an emotion, even in the absence of the concrete understanding. And yet, at the same time, the poem also communicates a bit of uncertainty about whether poetry itself can offer this connection the way that music can. So one day, the poet William Wordsworth saw a young woman from the Highlands region of Scotland working alone in a field and harvesting grain with a sickle. Now, she was attractive. She was singing a luring song whose melody sounded sad and melancholy. I mean, her song was quite sad. Her voice was as melodious as a nightingale's and could be heard echoing throughout the valley. It was a voice suitable for welcoming some travelers to the deserts of Arabia. It was a voice which was more thrilling than that of a cuckoo bird, which was powerful enough to break the silence in the most remote group of islands that lie to the northwest of Scotland. The poet could not know the real reason of or story behind the sad song. So he thinks of several backstories behind the song. He said that the song may have been just a plaintive flaw about old unhappy battles and wars. Next, he said that the song may have been an ordinary song about the hardships of ordinary life, a collection of what happens every day and will continue to happen every day. The poet observed that regardless of the theme, the songs seemed endless, just like her work. The poet was so affected by the melody that he stopped moving altogether. He climbed the hills, his heart full with the melody. He went back to the same fields where the young woman was working, but the woman was no longer there, and he could no longer hear the melodious voice or know the real backstory behind her sad talk. So this is the summary of the Solitary Reaper. Now, next we move on to another author, P.B. Shelley. He's again another very prominent um, poet of the Romantic period, right? So he's one of the finest poets in the English Romantic tradition. He was an idealist, a visionary, and a revolutionary, and was deeply interested in politics of his time. Now, his work, especially his poetry, articulates his own spirit, his quest for love, and his passion for social justice. His art of using unconventional ideas within conventional poetic forms was unrivaled. Now, Shelley was born on August 4th, 1792, at Field Place near Horsham, Sussex, England. He began writing poetry while at Eton, but his first publication was a Gothic novel, Jastrozy, in which he voiced his own heretical and aesthetic opinions through the villain Jastrozy. In 1811, Shelley wrote a pamphlet and circulated titled The Necessity of Atheism, which led to his expulsion from Oxford after less than a year's enrollment. Now, his personal life was quite tumultuous. It was quite, it was not that happy life. He had a lot of problems throughout his life. His adherence to the notion of free love brought him a lot of agony. Now, I think in the year 1820, had produced all his major works, including Prometheus Unbound. And Prometheus Unbound is a keystone of Shelley's poetic achievement. And some of the most finest and most hopeful shorter poems are Ode to Liberty, Ode to the West Wind, The Cloud, To a Skylark. Okay. And in fact, Shelley was drowned in a storm while attempting to sail from Leghorn to La Spezia, Italy in his boat, right? So here we come up with the poem by him, that is Ode to the West Wind. Now this Ode to the West Wind, it's a first person persona, right? In 5 stanzas. And it is strong and fearsome. In the first stanza, the wind blows the leaves of autumn. In the second stanza, the wind blows the clouds in the sky. Look at this, how strong the wind is according to Shelley, and what kind of a thing it brings in. He's like, appreciating it. And that's how he calls it Ode to the West Wind. There's a wind which is blowing from the west, and what all things it does, you just look into it. Now, in the third stanza, the wind blows across an island and the waves of the sea. In the fourth stanza, the persona imagines being the leaf, cloud, or wave, sharing in the wind's strength. He desires to be lifted up rather than caught low on the thorns of life, for he sees himself as like the wind, tameless and swift and proud. In the final stanza, he asks the wind to play upon him like a lyre. He wants to share the wind's fierce spirit. Look at the things which he loves to be, and he's trying to, connect with wind and, kind of trying to identify himself with that, the power of the wind, right? And then he wants to share the wind's fierce spirit. In turn, he would have the power to spread his words throughout the world, reawakening it. He feels like, just like the wind, may his poetry also spread across all these oceans and to a different, places of the world. This is what he wants it, just like the wind, right? So the form of the poem is consistent in pattern. Each stanza is 14 lines in length, using the rhyming pattern of ABA, BCB, CDC, DED, EE. This is called terza rima, the form used by Dante in his Divine Comedy. Now, keeping in mind that this is an ode, a choral celebration, the tone of the speaker understandably includes excitement, pleasure, joy, and hope. See, unlike elegy, ode is something which is, where you elevate it. The idea behind an ode is you kind of appreciate it, right? So here the west wind has been complimented and appreciated, right? And Shelley draws a parallel between the seasonal cycles of the wind and that of the ever changing spirit. Here, nature in the form of the wind is presented, according to Abrams, as the outer correspondent to an inner change from apathy to spiritual vitality and from imaginative sterility to a burst of creative power. So here he is appreciating wind because of the wind there can be, the old or the dead leaves which are dropped out from the plant gets carried away, right? So that has to, again, in the place of these leaves, there will be a rebirth of new leaves. So the wind will ultimately bring rejuvenation and rebirth. And the poet is trying to promote that this rebirth through his poem. He wishes to see the same reform in society. That is to say that in both political and poetic means for a better future of a society as a whole. So just like the wind, which is bringing a kind of a change in the natural world, he wants the similar, he wishes to get the similar reform in society. Right. So next, moving on to the other poet, John Keats. You remember I told you in the beginning itself, he's also one along with the Wordsworth, John Keats. Okay. He was he was the last and the finest of all the English romantic poets. Unlike other romantic poets such as Wordsworth and Shelley, who were either reforming poetry or advocating reforms, Keats worshipped nature like a devotee, perfectly happy to express what was in his heart. Poetry, according to Keats, existed for its own sake and not for philosophy or politics' sake. Now, Keats was born on October 31st, 1795 in London. He lost both his parents at a young age. After his mother's death, Keats' maternal grandmother appointed two guardians, and when Keats was 15, he was withdrawn from the school to apprentice with an apothecary surgeon and study medicine in a London hospital. And in 1816, Keats became a licensed apothecary. I mean, apothecary is a medical professional who formulates and dispenses medicines to physicians, surgeons, and patients, but he never practiced his profession, deciding instead to write poetry. So he published his first volume, Poems by John Keats, then Endymion, a 4,000 line allegorical romance based on the Greek myth of the same name, appeared the following year. And then there are some more like Hyperion, and then Milton. Then you have Lamia, Isabella, The Eve of Saint Agnes, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode on Melancholy, Ode on a Grecian Urn, and so on. He died on February 23rd at the age of 25. Right. This is a brief bio about John Keats. Now let us look into the poem which is prescribed as Ode on a Grecian Urn. Now we all know what an urn is, right? Urn is something, it's a container where, the ashes are collected in it. The ashes of the dead and deceased are collected. Now, again, look at this word ode. So he talks, nice about this Grecian urn. So this is one of the greatest odes of English literature written by John Keats, who was a great English romantic poet. The poem was written in 1819 and published in 1820 anonymously in Annals of the Fine Arts. In this poem, Keats presents the complexity between art and reality. This poem is written in the form of an ode, a type of lyrical poem that usually gives the writer personal emotions about a person or an object. So basically, what is an ode? Let me just give you an inputs on ode. It's a style of poem that glorifies its subject, So just like an ode to a west wind was glorified. Did I not tell you? That has been elevated. The tone of the poem, the tone of this, the concept, the entire concept, you see it in a very elevated manner. I mean, the praising way. And the poetic form originated in ancient Greece, which makes it a fitting choice for ode on a Grecian urn. Now, Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats muses and celebrates art's ability, in this case, the images upon a piece of ancient Greek pottery, to capture and immortalize life's beauty. So, in this poem, Keats thinks over the strange idea of the human figures carved into the urn. I mean, there are a kind of beautiful carved figures on this urn, the Grecian urn. They are paradoxical figures, free from the constraints and influences of time, but at the same time, imprisoned in an exact moment. For all that, they don't have to worry about growing old or dying. They cannot experience life as it is for the rest of the humanity. And Ode on a Grecian Urn represents three attempts at engaging with the urn and its scenes across the stanzas. Keats tries to wonder about who the figures are, what they are doing, what they represent, and what the underlying meaning of their images might be. But by the end of the poem, he realizes that the entire process of questioning is fairly redundant. Right. So the next part of it is Unit 6. We're going to talk about Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning. But please remember, before we move on to the Unit 6, we have to look into the Victorian age. Why? Because they belong to this age, right? Um, the earlier uh, poets, to which age did they belong? I mean, what was it we were talking about? Yeah? Yes? Romantic period, right? You remember P.B. Shelley and John Keats. Now comes the next period, that is the Victorian age. So what I mean, the poets here, they belong to this age, this particular age. So just a quick glance and a glimpse into this Victorian age. Okay, after the Romantic revival, the literature of the Victorian age entered into a new period. The literature of this period expressed the fusion of romanticism to realism. The Victorian age is rich in literature. And then let me tell you, the Victorian age has got its name from the ruler, Queen Victoria, right? It produced two great poets like Tennyson and Browning, dramatists like Shaw and Galsworthy, novelists like Charles Dickens and Hardy, and essayists like Carlyle and Stevenson. The age is remarkable for the excellence of its literature. Literature of this age tends to depict daily life. It reflected the practical problems and interests of daily life. Now, Victorian literature often presented varied social classes of people rather than just the aristocracy. I mean, not just the rich people, had middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, and the poor people and the poor category. So, the literature of Victorian comprised most of these, the social classes of people, right? This made it more popular among the middle classes. There are a few primary characteristics of Victorian literature, and it often had a moral purpose and tended to deviate from the earlier concept of art for art's sake. So look at this. Victorian literature did comprise a kind of a moral purpose. So it had some kind of motive behind these poems. Victorians wanted their art to do more than just appease the senses. They wanted it to serve a purpose, often a moral or a political one. The Victorian era tended to be an era of doubt and pessimism. The influence of science is felt here as scientific advances led people to feel uncertain about the future. I mean, you all remember there was a lot of chaos at that point of time because of industrial revolution, and there was French revolution and so many other happenings in the world around, and it did have a lot of influence during this period. The second half of the Victorian era is influenced by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. So if you look at the literature of this period, was characterized by things both practical and materialistic. Most of the writers exalted a purely ideal life. Now, coming to this writer, Alfred Tennyson, he is a poet who belongs to this Victorian age. Okay, so Alfred Tennyson. Now, Tennyson and Browning are eminent Victorian poets. So it's an Victorianism, as you all know, is an oversimplification in describing an age which was full of fervent experimentation and awareness. Right. And Alfred Tennyson is as much representative poet of Victorian age as was Chaucer of 14th century and Alexander Pope was of 18th century. Look at this. So if you can remember Chaucer, uh, Geoffrey Chaucer of 14th century, I mean, they kind of represented that age, in fact. Alexander Pope of the 18th century. You even call it as age of Pope. Similar way, Alfred Tennyson was representing the age of Victorian period. Okay. And Tennyson as poet represented the true spirit of his age. He's not only the follower, but as an interpreter of the age. His truly representative character made him universally popular in his own age. Alfred Lord Tennyson was the most highly regarded poet of his period and the most widely read of all the English poets. The quality of his work varied greatly, for he included for he included in his poetry themes and subjects that were of intense interest to the Victorians. Tennyson's technical skill and prosody were unsurpassed. Now, he actually breathed his spirit of his age into his poetry. That is why his poems are a reflection of his age. Various characteristics of the Victorian age could be seen in the works of Tennyson. The age was an age of democratic spirit, and common people were fighting for the equal rights and political freedom. So he himself belonged to the upper middle class and could not go beyond the limitations of his middle class. He favored peaceful and the slow evolution rather than any kind of struggle or revolution. Right. So, what is it, the poem which we are going to talk about, written by Alfred Lord Tennyson? That is Ulysses. Now, Ulysses was written in 1833 by Alfred Lord Tennyson, the future poet laureate of Great Britain. The poem takes the form of a dramatic monologue spoken by Ulysses, a character who also appears in Homer's Greek epic, the Odyssey, and Dante's Italian epic, the Inferno. So, I mean, this is a kind of a character where you will get to see in a Greek epic, the Odyssey, and even in the Italian epic, the Inferno. Similar thing has been taken up by Tennyson here. So, Ulysses is the Latinized name of Odysseus. In the Odyssey, Ulysses struggles to return home. But in Tennyson's Ulysses, an aged Ulysses is frustrated with domestic life and yearns to set sail again. I mean, he's not happy with his domestic life. Though he is being a ruler, he's a king, he returns back to his, family after a long trip. And then still he's not, I mean, a war, in fact. Then he comes back and doesn't want to settle down with his domestic life. And he yearns to set sail again. I mean, he's like aspiring to set sail again. He wants to go out again and continue exploring the world. Now, Dante seems to condemn Ulysses recklessly as an explorer, but in Tennyson's poem, there's nobility and heroism. Look at this. In Tennyson's poem, Tennyson brings in the nobility and heroism in Ulysses, boundless curiosity and undaunted spirit. I mean, he writes it in a good way. He brings out a good meaning to it of this character, Ulysses. And he tells us the tale of the great hero who sets out for a final journey before his death. He wants to, yes, dear, I'll just get back to you. I'll get back to you. Rishda, I'll get back. Right. And Ulysses is not happy with his boring life as king of Ithaca. Now, this man, he's not happy. He wants to go out and travel again, for he believes that to be the purpose of his life. So he hands over his kingdom to his son, I think Telemachus, and along with his old companions, sets out on a final journey in his old age. The poem is a dramatic monologue written in unrhymed iambic pentameter. See, it is unrhymed. You will not find a kind of a rhyming words in this poem, right? It's a dramatic monologue, right? Now, these are the two main themes. One is seeking adventure. He explores the themes of his seeking adventure and the meaning of life. And he misses his old adventurous life and feels that life without excitement is no life at all. Now, if you look at the summary, what does it mean? It's a dramatic monologue. I hope you all know about dramatic monologue, where, it's a a single person talking to some anonymous listener. You will not find that listener in the poem anywhere, but you will only make some assumption that somebody is there and he's talking to someone. So that is called a monologue, dramatic monologue, right? So he laments the lack of adventure in his life and he yearns for the excitement of his younger younger years. Sorry. What's the meaning of Ulysses by Tennyson? Now, in the poem Ulysses, Tennyson explores the concept of what would happen to a hero like Ulysses after he has grown old. Tennyson shows Ulysses grappling with how he can continue to find meaning in his life when he is no longer able to have adventures. Okay, so this is all about Ulysses. Then comes My Last Duchess. I think we just have 2 minutes, and I think the window will get closed abruptly. So instead, what I would do is I'll start with Robert Browning, My Last Duchess, tomorrow, along with the third block. Okay? I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. So, right. So the meaning of Ulysses, that is what you asked me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Ulysses, meaning of Ulysses.
Actually, this is the name of the character here. In Ulysses is the name taken from the old classics of Homer, written by Homer, and again, even what was that? The Inferno, Dante's Inferno. That's a name of the character, right?
Name of the character.
Yeah, yeah. Or you can, means like, it's like full of anger, a name of a boy, full of anger and wrathful. So if you look at this Tennyson's Ulysses, he's not angry about it, but he's not happy and neither or satisfied with it, with his life. That is what it shows. So Ulysses means that he's like ambitious. Okay. And the actual meaning is he's wrathful or full of anger. Got it?
Yes, ma'am, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. 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 So the window gets closed abruptly. I want you all to go and go back and read the entire material of this, whatever we've done today, the entire second block, except the last Duchess of the Robert Browning. Okay, that we will continue it tomorrow. Is that clear? Yeah, you can leave the session. I'll start with this in the next class.